Ladies and gentlemen, one of the greatest battles a person will ever fight does not happen externally. It happens internally, in the mind. Long before people collapse physically, they collapse mentally under the weight of uncertainty. They wake up thinking about tomorrow, analyzing every possible outcome, trying to predict what could go wrong before it even happens. And the tragedy is that many people call this wisdom, when in reality it is fear wearing the disguise of responsibility. Worry has a way of convincing intelligent people that they are being productive. But there is a difference between preparation and obsession. Preparation deals with what can be done today. Worry attempts to control tomorrow before it arrives. That is why anxious people are often mentally exhausted without accomplishing anything meaningful. Their energy is consumed by imagined scenarios, hypothetical disasters, and questions that have no immediate answers. The deeper issue beneath worry is not circumstance. It is trust. Because the moment a person feels they must personally guarantee every outcome, anxiety becomes inevitable. Human beings were never designed to carry the psychological burden of total control. The mind breaks down under that pressure. And yet this is exactly how many people live. They believe peace will come once every detail is visible, once every risk disappears, once every uncertainty is removed. But life does not work that way, and neither does faith. God has never operated by revealing the entire blueprint in advance. Throughout Scripture, people were asked to move before they fully understood where they were going. Abraham was told to leave his country before he knew his destination. Moses stood before a sea before it opened. Joshua stepped into the Jordan before the waters parted. Again and again, the pattern is consistent. Clarity follows obedience, not the other way around. This is difficult for modern minds because people have become addicted to certainty. You want guarantees before commitment. They want evidence before trust. They want complete explanations before taking a single step forward. But if God showed you every detail of your future, faith would become unnecessary. Much of what develops spiritual maturity is learning how to move while unanswered questions still exist. Psychologically, uncertainty creates discomfort because the human brain is wired to seek predictability. People feel safer when they can calculate outcomes. But spiritually, there are seasons where God intentionally allows uncertainty because certainty often produces self-reliance, while uncertainty reveals dependence. And dependence is uncomfortable for pride. Most people do not realize how deeply they trust themselves until they enter a situation they cannot control. That is why worry becomes so dangerous. It slowly shifts a person's focus away from God's ability and onto their own limitations. They begin measuring every challenge according to their resources, bias, their understanding, their timing. And when human limitation becomes the center of attention, fear naturally increases. Worry magnifies problems while shrinking perspective. Jesus addressed this directly when he spoke about the futility of anxiety. He asked a powerful question. Which of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? In other words, worry creates emotional suffering without creating solutions. It drains today's strength while offering nothing in return. In fact, many people are fighting battles twice, once in their imagination and later in reality, if the problem even happens at all. There is also something profoundly deceptive about worry because it creates the illusion of control. People think if they think hard enough, stress long enough, or analyze deeply enough, they can somehow prevent pain. But excessive worry does not protect the future. It only steals peace from the present. And this is where trust becomes transformational. Trust is no passive denial. It is the conscious decision to believe that God's wisdom exceeds your understanding, even when circumstances remain unclear. It means accepting that you do not need to understand everything in order to move forward faithfully. Peace does not come from possessing all the answers. Peace comes from confidence in the character of the one leading you. Some of the greatest moments in your life will begin with uncertainty. Not because God abandoned you, but because He is teaching you to walk beyond the limits of your own understanding. The question is not whether uncertainty will appear. The question is what will govern you when it does, fear or faith. And sometimes the greatest act of faith is simply refusing to panic while God is still working. One of the most difficult realities for human beings to accept is that just because something cannot be seen does not mean nothing is happening. People naturally trust visible evidence. They trust movement they can measure, program, ISAs. they can track, answers they can immediately verify. And when those things disappear, anxiety begins to grow. Silence feels threatening to the human mind because uncertainty creates the impression that control has been lost. This is why waiting seasons become emotionally exhausting. Not because God is absent, but because human beings often interpret stillness as abandonment. When prayers are not answered immediately, when opportunities do not appear on schedule, when circumstances remain unchanged longer than expected, many people quietly assume that God has stopped working. But some of the most important developments in life happen beneath the surface long before they become visible externally. A farmer understands this principle better than most people. When a seed is placed into the ground, there is a period where absolutely nothing appears to be happening. From the outside, the field looks unchanged, silent, empty. But underneath the soil, roots are forming, systems are developing. Life is emerging in ways invisible to the eye. And if someone judged the process only by surface appearance, they would falsely conclude that growth had failed. Human beings often make the same mistake spiritually. They evaluate their lives only by visible results. If the door has not opened yet, they assume the answer is no. If the breakthrough has not arrived yet, they assume God has forgotten them. But divine preparation frequently happens in hidden places. God works in conversations you never hear, circumstances you never see, and timing you do not yet understand. The problem is that modern culture conditions people to expect immediate results. Everything is built around speed, instant access, immediate gratification. And that mindset quietly damages spiritual endurance because it trains people to believe that delay automatically means failure. But delay and denial are not the same thing. In many cases, what feels like postponement is actually preparation. There are moments when God withholds certain opportunities not to punish you, but to prepare you for them. Because receiving something before you are emotionally, mentally, or spiritually ready can become destructive instead of beneficial. People often ask God for greater influence, greater responsibility, greater blessing, while remaining unprepared for the pressure attached to those things. And wisdom understands that timing matters as much as opportunity itself. Psychologically, this is difficult because the human mind seeks closure. People want certainty because uncertainty creates emotional tension. The brain constantly tries to resolve incomplete situations. That is why waiting feels uncomfortable. It forces individuals to confront how little control they actually possess. And for many people, that realization becomes deeply unsettling. But spiritually, waiting seasons reveal what truly governs a person's heart. Some people trust God only when progress is visible. Others learn how to trust I'm even in silence. And there is a profound difference between the two. But your faith is not built on constant reassurance. It is built on confidence in God's character, even when immediate evidence is unavailable. Think about how often God's greatest protections arrive disguised as disappointments. A closed door that once felt devastating later reveals itself to have been necessary. A relationship that ended becomes protection from future destruction. An opportunity that failed becomes the very reason a greater opportunity eventually appeared. But human beings rarely recognize this in the moment because pain narrows perspective. That is why worry becomes so dangerous during seasons of silence. Worry convinces people to interpret temporary uncertainty as permanent defeat. It pushes the mind toward worst-case scenarios. It creates emotional conclusions without complete information. And many people sabotage their own peace because they assume God is inactive simply because they cannot immediate results. But God has never been limited by visibility. Some of the greatest changes in your life may already be unfolding beyond your awareness. Circumstances are shifting. People are being positioned. Lessons are being developed within you that will become essential later. And while you are asking God for visible movement, He may be doing invisible preparation far more valuable than immediate relief. There is also humility in accepting that you do not need to see everything in order for God to be working. Human understanding is limited. People see fragments, God sees the entire structure. What appears delayed to you may actually be perfectly timed from a perspective greater than your own. And this is where peace begins to mature. Not when every question is answered, but when you stop demanding constant proof that God is present. Sometimes faith means trusting that silence is not emptiness. Sometimes it means believing that unseen work is still real work. Because just Because you cannot see the roots forming does not mean the harvest is not coming. There comes a point in many people's lives where the greatest obstacle standing in front of them is no longer the situation itself. It is their own need to fully understand everything before they move. They delay decisions, postpone obedience, resist opportunities, and remain emotionally stuck because they are waiting for absolute clarity. They tell themselves they are being careful, wise, or responsible. But often what appears to be wisdom is actually fear seeking protection through overanalysis. The human mind naturally wants certainty. It wants guarantees before commitment. People feel safer when they can predict outcomes, calculate risks, and control variables. And to some degree, thoughtful planning is necessary. God does not call people to recklessness, but there is a significant difference between wise preparation and paralyzing hesitation. One moves a person forward responsibly, the other keeps. Endless contemplation. Many individuals spend years standing at the edge of opportunities because they believe they must first eliminate every unknown. They want to know how everything will work out before they take the first step. They want complete explanations before obedience. But life rarely unfolds that way. In fact, some of the most transformative moments in human history began with incomplete understanding. Noah built an ark before rain had ever fallen. Peter stepped out onto water before he understood how he would stand. The disciples followed Jesus without knowing where the journey would ultimately lead. Again and again, the pattern remains consistent. Movement preceded clarity. Direction became clearer after obedience began. This challenges modern thinking because people have become conditioned to believe that certainty must come first. But psychologically, the demand for total certainty is impossible to satisfy. There will always be variables you cannot predict, circumstances you cannot control, and outcomes you cannot guarantee. If a person waits until all fear disappears before acting, they may wait forever. What many people call thinking things through is often an attempt to emotionally protect themselves from disappointment, failure, or uncertainty. Overthinking creates the illusion of safety because it feels productive. The mind stays busy analyzing possibilities, rehearsing conversations, imagining outcomes. But excessive analysis can quietly become a form of avoidance. Instead of moving forward imperfectly, people remain frozen in mental preparation. And the tragedy is that opportunities frequently expire while people are still trying to feel ready. Fear rarely announces itself honestly. It does not always say, "I am afraid." Sometimes it says, "I need more time." Sometimes it says, "I'm waiting for the right moment." Sometimes it says, "I just need a little more information." And while discernment certainly matters, many people are not lacking information, they are lacking the courage to move while uncertainty still exists. Faith has always required movement before complete understanding. Not blind recklessness, but trust strong enough to take the next step without possessing the entire map. God often reveals direction progressively because dependence grows progressively. If every detail were visible from the beginning, people would trust the plan instead of trusting God. There is also something deeply transformational about taking one faithful step at a time. Motion creates clarity. Action exposes what endless thinking cannot. Many answers only emerge after movement begins. A person discovers strength by stepping into responsibility, not merely by thinking about responsibility. Confidence develops through action, not through endless internal debate. This is especially important because hesitation slowly reshapes identity. The longer people remain inactive, the more fear gains authority over them. Begin doubting their instincts, their calling, their ability to hear God clearly. Eventually, avoidance becomes habitual, and what started as caution becomes bondage. Meanwhile, life continues moving. Time passes. Opportunities shift. Relationships evolve. And many people later realize that their greatest regret was not failure, it was hesitation. It was standing still while waiting for impossible levels of certainty. There are moments when God intentionally allows ambiguity because He is developing trust beyond intellect alone. Human beings naturally want explanations, but spiritual maturity often requires obedience before understanding. This does not mean abandoning wisdom or discernment. It means accepting that not every answer will arrive in advance. Sometimes God gives enough light for the next step, but not enough for the entire journey. and that can feel uncomfortable for people who want total control. But control has never been the foundation of peace. Trust is. You do not need to have every detail figured out in order to move forward faithfully. You do not need guarantees to obey God. You do not need perfect certainty to take the next step He has placed in front of you. Because often the breakthrough people are praying for is waiting on the other side of the step they are afraid to take. At some point, every person must decide what will ultimately govern their life, fear or trust. Because after all the overthinking, all the worrying, all the attempts to control outcomes, there comes a moment where the soul grows tired of carrying burdens it was never designed to carry. Human beings were not created to sustain the emotional weight of trying to manage every possible future. That pressure slowly drains peace, clarity, and strength. And many people live with constant internal tension because they believe everything depends entirely on them. But one of the most liberating truths a person can discover is this: God is not reacting to your future. He is already there. Nothing you are facing has caught Him by surprise. The obstacles troubling your mind today were known long before you arrived at this moment. The closed doors, the delays, the uncertainty, the unanswered questions, none of it exists outside His awareness. And this changes the entire psychological posture of a person. Because when individuals believe they are alone in navigating uncertainty, anxiety naturally intensifies. But when they understand that God has already gone ahead of them, fear begins losing its authority. This does not mean life suddenly becomes easy. Faith is not the denial of difficulty. Challenges remain real. Loss still hurts. Waiting still stretches emotional endurance. Responsibility still requires effort and discipline. But confidence grows when a person realizes they are no longer walking into the unknown by themselves. One of the greatest sources of human anxiety is the illusion that everything depends upon personal strength alone. People quiet. I carry the belief that if they make one wrong decision, everything will collapse. If they fail, they will never recover. If they cannot immediately solve the problem, disaster is inevitable. And this mindset creates constant mental strain because finite human beings are attempting to function with the pressure of omniscience. But God never asked you to control the entire outcome. He asked you to trust Him with the next step. There is a profound difference between responsibility and ownership. Responsibility means faithfully doing what God has placed in front of you. Ownership means assuming you alone must sustain, manage, and secure every result. Many people are emotionally exhausted because they have confused the two. They are carrying outcomes that belong to God while neglecting the peace He intended for them to have. This is why surrender becomes so powerful psychologically and spiritually. Surrender is not weakness, it is clarity. It is recognizing the limits of human control while placing confidence in a wisdom greater than your own. And contrary to what many assume, surrender does not produce passivity, it produces stability. Because once a person stops obsessing over controlling everything, they gain the emotional freedom to move forward with focus and courage. Think about how differently people live when they truly believe God has already prepared the way before them. They stop panicking at every obstacle because obstacles no longer appear final. They stop interpreting every delay as destruction. They stop allowing temporary uncertainty to define permanent conclusions. Instead of living reactively, they begin living with quiet confidence. And that confidence is not arrogance. It is trust rooted in perspective. Human beings see moments. God sees the entire structure of a life. People see immediate pain. God sees long-term purpose. People often judge situations by present discomfort, while God operates according to eternal understanding. That is why some experiences that once felt devastating later become the very events that redirected a person toward purpose, maturity, and transformation. There is also something deeply strengthening about realizing you do not have to force every door open yourself. Some opportunities require effort and discipline, yes. But what God ordains cannot ultimately be prevented by human limitation, opposition, or delay. The burden of making everything happen through sheer personal striving slowly begins to disappear when a person understands that God is capable of creating pathways where none appear visible. This is why peace becomes possible even before circumstances change. Because peace is not the absence of uncertainty. Peace is confidence in who walks with you through uncertainty. And perhaps this is what many people need most right now. Not more explanations, but deeper trust. Not more control, but greater surrender. Not constant reassurance about the future, but confidence that God is already present. Find T there. You may not see the entire road ahead today, but you do not need to. The one who called you forward has already prepared the path before your feet. So stop exhausting yourself trying to figure out how God will do it and start walking as if He already has.